Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. We're just going to give it a few moments while we let attendees trickle in today. And we can get started shortly here. I'm just going to give it a few more moments. Okay. Welcome to Website and Social Media Archiving. My name is Greg Stewart, and I am the Education Program Manager at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts, or CCAHA as we call it. I use he and they pronouns. For accessibility's sake, I will say that I am a white person with glasses and headphones, and I'm wearing a yellow collared shirt today with a black sweater, and my background is blurred. And just a bit more about today's webinar. Today you will meet Kaitlyn Pettengill, our new digital archive specialist. She will discuss some of the commonly used tools for archiving your website, blog, and social media with a focus on preserving the experience and functionality of your original digital artifact. Whether you're looking to preserve a particular digital event or your own institutional website, we say that your web presence is worth archiving. Kaitlyn will also discuss her role at the center and how you can work with her on digital preservation assessment, a digitization plan, and other services. And I will just say that today's webinar is meant to be fairly introductory for those who may not have that much experience with web archiving. If this is a topic you already know pretty well, then I hope this serves as a nice refresher. But before we get into the presentation, just some Zoom housekeeping. As you may know, you're in Zoom webinar, which means that your video and audio are turned off, but you can ask questions or make comments to us in the chat. This program is auto closed captioned in English, and you can turn on subtitles with the little CC button in the Zoom toolbar. We also have American Sign Language interpretation today. And I just wanted to take this opportunity as a reminder to say that if you need interpretation in any language, live captioning or slides sent in advance with alt text for use with screen readers, please take a look at our accessibility page. And I'm going to drop that in the chat so that you can see how to do that. Whoops, for some reason that copied just the text. Well, I'll work on that in a minute and I'll put that in there. But for now, I think I want to move on. So we're going to have a presentation from our speaker today, followed by Q&A with you. But please feel free to ask questions anytime during the program. And I will be reading those questions aloud when we get to time for Q&A. So as you can see, the program is being recorded. And we'll send a recording as well as the PowerPoint and any resources we've shared in a follow-up email. And I wanted to thank the National Endowment for Humanities, the William Penn Foundation, and the Independence Foundation who make today's program possible. So yes, thank you, Kaitlyn. On that next slide, just one quick note about the organization that I work for, CCAHA. We are a regional conservation lab and preservation services facility. We're based in Philadelphia, but we work with organizations and clients all across the country. Our conservators treat paper-based objects like books, photographs, documents, artworks on paper, and more. And our preservation services staff work in the field, providing educational programs like the one you're seeing today, and helping institutions plan for the future of their collections. The center also offers a wide range of digitization services, as well as fundraising assistance, housing and framing, and more. And you can learn more about us and what we do at our website, ccaha.org. So just a little bit more about our speaker today. As the digital archive specialist, Kaitlyn conducts digital preservation assessments and assists with digitization planning for collecting organizations. She advises organizations in the ongoing development, implementation, and operation of their digital preservation programs, as well as on recommendations for the development and implementation of digital preservation strategies, technologies, and procedures. Prior to joining CCAHA staff this year in 2024, Kaitlyn worked as the Digital Projects Coordinator for the Atwater Kent Collection at Drexel University and as the Digital Services Archivist at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. Kaitlyn earned an MLIS from San José State University, where she specialized in digital collections and digital asset management. She also holds an MA degree in History of Art from the Courtauld Institute of Art in London and a BA in Art History and English Literature from Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, PA. And with that, I will turn it over to Kaitlyn. And thank you, Camilla, for dropping that proper link in the chat that I was trying to do. Go ahead.
Okay, it always feels I don't know, surprisingly impressive. I hear my resume read out by somebody else. I self-congratulating, I guess. For accessibility's sake, I'm just going to say that I am a white woman with blonde hair, wearing headphones, black sweater, and I'm sitting in an office. Hopefully the background is blurred so as not to be too distracting. So, as Greg said, this webinar is going to be about how your web content is worth preserving and how you can go about preserving it. So to begin with, I just want to acknowledge that I know we've got people in the audience today with a wide range of experience with web archiving, website construction. I am going to be keeping things directed towards people who are a little newer to web archiving. So the general theme is, of course, that your organization or your community's web content, if you're trying to archive for a community organization, that it's worth preserving. If the information here is too basic for anybody, I won't take any offense if you want to go about and reclaim your lunchtime. I've put together a resource list that includes all the links that I'm going to reference. I'll add maybe definitions of certain terms. So in case I do mention something that you're not familiar with, you can check the resource list. Digital archiving is full of a lot of acronyms. We love our acronyms. So to make it a little bit easier to understand, you can just check the resource list at the end. You are very welcome to email me with any follow-up questions if I can't answer them during this webinar time. If you have a very technical question for me, it would actually be preferable if you email me so I have a little bit of time to think about your question. I promise to reply quickly, even if it's just to say that I'm not sure how to do whatever it is that you want to do. So web archiving is extremely challenging. If you find it a daunting prospect, you are definitely not alone. There are research institutions with web research as their main goal that find this difficult. National libraries with multiple dedicated web archivists have a tough time doing this. Part of it is that we want to preserve the web as the dynamic, interactive ecosystem that it is, but that nature is what makes it so incredibly hard to preserve, because it is always changing. So the agenda for today is that I'm going to start with a definition of web archiving, a little bit of the history. I'll cover generally how it works. Sorry, I see that somebody has a problem with the screen share. Is there an issue with anybody else? All good?
Kaitlyn, I'm seeing your screen just fine,
okay,
if that's helpful.
Just wanted to make sure. So we'll talk about determining a project scope, because that's really important with digital archiving and web archiving in particular. You can't try and archive the entire internet on your own. I'll give some advice on how to ensure that your organization's website is actually archivable. And then I will talk about some tools and resources that are available for web and social media archiving. Some that are a little bit more advanced, but most of them are more introductory. So first, a caveat, which is that I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. Sometimes web archiving does touch on issues of privacy and copyright. So anything that I say today is just for educational purposes only. You need to consider any archiving outside of your own website and social media accounts. If you're trying to do, say, community archiving, you need to consider it in accordance with your overall institutional policies. So first, what is a web archive? So very basic, but it is not an archive that exists on the web. It is an archive of the web. So the Society of American Archivists defines it as the process of collecting, preserving, and providing enduring access to web content. The Internet Archive has a little bit more detailed definition, where it's just that they say it's it's a series of steps that work together for an end goal, which is to interact with the website as it looked on the day that it was archived. So the aim is to ensure that the information is preserved in an archival format for research and for the public so that it remains accessible. It should have all or as much of the functionality of the original site as it possibly can. And they should also document changes made to a website over time. So it's like, you could say, multiple editions of a book that have been published. As a little example, I went back and I found 3 versions of the Conservation Center's website homepage that were published over the last couple of decades. So this is the Conservation Center's site from 1998. And all 3 versions of the site that I'm going to show were taken from the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine, which is a digital archive that I'll talk about in more depth later on. So again, 1998, here's 2000, and here's 2005. So a quick note is that many, but not all of the links from the homepage can be explored if you are on the Wayback Machine. You can learn about staff members in those particular years, workshops that the center was offering, projects they were working on. And I'd say that our mission has actually remained remarkably consistent since 1998. So besides being a fun little nostalgia trip, why is web archiving important? Well, the web is the modern version of the town square. So it's like the community bulletin board or the speaker's corner. It's used by tiny little community groups, individuals, and also the federal government to create content that isn't available anywhere else, just online. So the growing portion of human culture that is created and recorded on the web makes it inevitable that more and more libraries and archives are going to have to face the challenges of web archiving. So memory institutions, the organizations that are dedicated to preserving our cultural memory, are going to have to handle the web. If we don't archive websites in the moment, then we're going to end up with what people would call a digital black hole in the historical record. And the web is dynamic, it's always changing. You can interact with it in a multitude of ways, on your laptop, on your phone, through like video game consoles these days. It means that the tools that are needed for web archiving can change and they become obsolete very quickly. So you can find a great resource online that says, check out these tools, and then a year later, they are no longer functional. Our algorithms change, companies' APIs change, news sites will add paywalls, message boards will add passworded logins, and all of that can impact how web content is preserved. But I want to stress to everyone that the issues that the really big web archives, the national web archives through organizations like Library of Congress, they have to grapple with these issues, and they're not necessarily ones that your organization needs to worry about. It's important to know what those larger issues are, but it is absolutely fine to say, that's all beyond our responsibility, beyond our capability. We're just going to focus on our own content. So now the scary stuff, which is how quickly loss happens on the web. I'm sure that everyone in attendance today understands that web archiving is important, but I just want to impress how much information and cultural heritage is at risk. There was a recent study by Pew Research Center that found that 25% of web pages posted between 2013 and 2023 have already been lost. 38% of web pages that Pew tried to access in 2023 from 2013 had already become non-functional. So that's 38%. 8% of web pages published during 2023 were gone in less than a year. A lot of web pages, they tend to last between 90 to 100 days before they're changed or they're moved. They disappear entirely. And 10% of event-related content that's been posted to social media platforms like Facebook is lost after a year. And that's from a study done by Old Dominion University. Here's an article from September 2024 from the BBC. that says that historians of the future might struggle to understand how we lived our lives in the early 21st century. That's because there is potentially history-deleting combination of how we view how we live our lives digitally, and a paucity of official efforts to archive the world's information. So very little of the content from the earliest days of the web, from the time of message boards and internet cafes, is still available. The very first web page that was set up in 1991 no longer exists. Recently, we've lost access to 12 years of MySpace music that might not have been saved elsewhere. The entire MTV News archive was removed by Paramount in July. Some of it was saved elsewhere, but a lot of it wasn't. And there's another side to that kind of data loss. In this article, the author points out that it's not just about accidental cultural heritage that's being lost. It's a tool that can be used by unscrupulous companies and governments to create a selective view of history. So a government might tell their National Archive not to save stories from news organizations that cast them in a bad light. So how does web archiving work? Well, archivists typically employ automated web crawlers to capture the massive amount of information that's available on the web. A web crawler is often called a harvester or a robot. Sometimes it's called a spider. Basically, it's software that automatically traverses the web, which is why it's a spider. It follows links from page to page. It downloads documents. It's meant to act much as a person would when they are using sites. Probably the best known one is the Wayback Machine. It's run through a crawler. That's the one that I showed you earlier, some of the pictures from the Conservation Center. Archivists are going to need to capture a lot of different types of web content that comes from code, style sheets, images, video. They also need to capture metadata, which is data about data. So that might include the access time or the content size. They often can't do information about the web page itself, although I know that AI is getting into that. So what I mean is, like, they can't take content descriptions and create metadata from that, but they can do some of the more automated bulk things. And that's all necessary for establishing the authenticity of the archived collection. You'll need to know what date that it was crawled. Web archives rely on crawling as their primary means of collection, but it can be very difficult. There's something that's called the robots exclusion protocol, which is quite technical, but it basically means that crawlers can't access parts of a website, and you can control that in the code. So web archivists can ignore that request. It's just a kind of please turn away and crawl it anyway, but they can't follow links to, say, the results page behind a web form, or if there's a database that you can access that's being pulled from somewhere else. So a lot of the archiving tools can't capture that, and they also can't always capture, say, ad banners, which is an important thing if you want to capture a snapshot in time. What are the ads on that site saying? So this is a basic web crawling process workflow. This specific one is taken from Archive-It, which is the service of the Internet Archive, but it's going to be a similar workflow even if you're doing things more manually through other programs like Conifer, which I'll show you later. So at the upper left, you've got the person who's doing the appraisal or the accession, who's selecting the contents that they're going to want to crawl. And once you've identified it, you have to take the seed, which is the seed URL. It's the starting point URL for the crawler, and you have the smaller seeds that come off of that seed URL, which are the different pages. And that's how you set up the bot crawl to cover the scope that the crawler is going to capture. And this is all pretty easy to do via services like Archive-It or like Community Webs. You can start the crawl, and then once it's completed its crawl and it's gathered all of the information from the site that you've asked it to crawl, you can save that as what we call a web archive file or a work file. That is a package together file that contains all of that dynamic content, the HTML files, the CSS files, the images, the video. And it's the international standard for web archiving. But unfortunately, it's not easy to just replay them. You can't just open them up on your laptop and have them have full functionality. So you have to use a replay mechanism. And programs like Archive-It have that built in. Internet Archive uses one called Wayback. But there are other individual ones that you can use, like replayweb.page, which is what Conifer uses. You then need to do quality assurance to check the quality of the capture, because doing that crawl is a very complex process from the side of the bot. If you're archiving for collections and not just documenting your own site for yourself and your organization's future, then there's going to probably be more metadata that you need to collect. So it should be more robust if you're collecting, say, for your community and you're crawling a number of sites that are done by community members that you've identified as being part of that community group. But if you're just documenting your own website for your own use, you still need to have a certain amount of metadata, basic information that you've recorded and attached to that file so that you can still access it in the future and you can find it. Many national libraries and archives have big web archiving initiatives. Sometimes they're very specific to a country. Library of Congress is only interested in collecting American sites because that's what their mission is. You've got the UK National Archives, which obviously collect British sites. Canada, a lot of countries will do specific to their country. And then there are also very specific topic collections. So the one that I'm showing right now, this is the Web Cultures Web Archive that Library of Congress does. It actually came out of their folk collections, the American Folk Life Center, because there's a lot of folk life on the web now. And they want to basically create a record of these new branches of folk life. Their mission is to document the traditional cultural forms and practices, and they've now got it was a creepypasta, scary stories, or internet jokes and memes, or the Urban Dictionary. Those are all now versions of folk culture, so they need to be documented. You can ask the Library of Congress to archive a specific website. It's pretty easy to find on their web archive pages. I can include the link in the resources page. But if they do approve it, which it has to be officially approved by a staff member, you still won't have any control over the process. So that might work if you want to be really hands-off, and if the Library of Congress is interested in whatever material you want to collect, but you'll have no control over it after they take it on. There are specific initiatives for documenting conflicts that you might see. It's important to document things like, the Russo-Ukrainian War. There's the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Online program. There's also a Palestinian Museum digital archive that's being run by the National Library of Palestine. There are projects like CARTA, or the Collaborative Art Archive from the New York Art Resources Consortium, which is a group of art libraries that are working together to document digital artwork. There's also social media documentation happening through organizations like Documenting the Now. They have collected posts about social justice movements like Black Lives Matter. There have also been attempts to archive the Me Too movement, where you're following those hashtags, but it's very complicated. So it's not something I would recommend for anybody who doesn't have a lot of resources at their fingertips. So the first thing is to define where you want to start, what you want to achieve, and to set the scope of the project. Are you interested in documenting just your own website, that of your community? What is that overall project? And then what elements do you want to preserve? For web historians, it's important maybe to include temporary banners at the top of a library page that say things like "closed for COVID," or the advertisements that are showing up. But you might not be interested in that for your own website. maybe you're interested in the layout. So you don't want to just save the images and the text because it's important how it was laid out for people, or you want to save comments. Maybe you're looking to sunset a digital project and you want to make sure that you document it from the public facing side before you do that. Maybe you're gearing up for a major redesign and you want to make sure that you capture your current site before you do that. So when it comes to web archiving, I would say that doing something is better than doing nothing. You're not going to break the internet if you do it wrong. The biggest issue with web archiving, besides how best to do it and how to invest your resources, is just the matter of privacy. So just sort of general archives and museum ethical standards obviously apply to the web as well as to any other documents that you would have that were physical. So I want to talk a little bit about the artifactual versus informational value of websites. When we digitize physical material, like a book or a photograph, one of the major things that we consider is if we are trying to document its artifactual kind of physical presence, the aesthetic experience of working with a book, or if we are just interested in the information in that book, the words on the page. So say if you're trying to photograph a book, these photographs were taken of a codex from the 5th century that belongs to the Morgan Library. And the Morgan staff weren't interested in just the words in the book. They wanted to document how it was constructed. So they took a lot of photographs of the binding, of the tooling, how the pages were held together, how the ink, was put onto the page. But here we've got a Google Book scan of Northanger Abbey. They weren't as interested in the physicality of the book because it's a kind of nondescript edition. And so they just wanted to capture the words on the page. There are a few design elements there, obviously, in that like decorative N, but it's really just about the story itself. And this, it's from Google Book Scan that was done from the University of Michigan in 2009. Sometimes you're interested in both. And this is a really interesting case of a digital restoration of the great parchment book of the Honorable Irish Society that's at the London Archives. It was very badly damaged in a fire in 1786. They could not conserve it in a way that made the text fully legible. So what they did is they took just hundreds of little snapshots, digitally pieced it together, and then created a transcript from that. So you can see that the image on the left is the most artifactual. It's the physical representation in space of that page. Then you've got the digitally stitched together image, and then you've got just the transcription, which is just the information. And this is still applicable to websites. It's a way of considering what the value is of the website that you want to document. Are you just interested in the text? Are you interested in the site structure, the design? Do you care about the website code? Do you want to keep the embedded images and videos? Are there Flash animations that you can somehow still view in 2024? Database queries, comments. So do you want to preserve the look and feel of the page as you would explore it, or are you only interested in that information? So if you are just interested in the information on the page, a static representation is maybe enough for your needs. Maybe you can just do a screenshot or a PDF or even a copy paste of a blog post into a Word doc. It's not what would be considered best practices web archiving, but if that's just what your organization is interested in, it might be plenty for your needs, and it would certainly be easier and require fewer resources. So here are some archiving tips from the Library of Congress. They say, first, identify where you have websites. Maybe they're spread out all over the place. Then decide what information has long-term value to you, export that information, organize that information, and then follow preservation practices by making copies and managing them in different places, backing them up. First, you want to find all that web content. Maybe it's spread across multiple websites, social media sites. Maybe you're interested in listserv emails that you've sent out. Make sure to include current information as well as older archived information when you are creating that list, because you're going to use it going forward, and whatever you're putting out now is eventually going to be obviously older content. So make sure it's a very complete list of everywhere that you have information available. Then you have to decide what information has long-term value. You can pick individual pieces of information. You don't have to worry about the whole site. If that's not what you're interested in, you can choose what parts of it has a long-term value to you. Then you can save the limited amount of information that you might have decided to choose. You can use the save as command on your web browser to just export the website as individual files. That's one of the easiest ways to do it. You can use programs like Archive and Conifer to save the entire site, but you have to make sure that you then have a way of linking them back together again so that you know what order they were in. You also want to save the metadata for the web content, such as the site name, the date created. Some of that will happen automatically through programs like Archive It, but if you're doing it yourself, just doing those save as commands, then you do need to make sure that you are saving that in the file name by giving them descriptive file names. So the date, the site name, the site page. Create a folder structure on your computer. It can be fairly simple, and then write a brief summary of the directory structure and its files. And again, this is if you're doing it yourself without working through programs like Archive It. Make sure that you have at least 2 copies of that information. More copies are better. 1 copy can stay on your computer. 1 can be put onto separate media. 1 can be put onto the cloud. Follow sort of the 3-2-1 idea, which is that you have 3 copies on 2 separate types of media in 1 removed geographical location as well as the one that you're in. And make sure that you have any summary description that you've created that's also saved with the files that are saved externally. So how do you make sure that your website is archivable? Ways to create a preservable website includes following web standards and accessibility guidelines, because if it is more accessible for human beings, it's more accessible for bots. Be careful with your robots.txt exclusions. Sometimes people will set their sites so that it can't be fully crawled by major search engines like Google. Google can work around that by only archiving your main site and not other web pages, but obviously that will prevent the crawlers from fully documenting your site. You want to use a site map. You want to use links that are very clear about what they are. You want to make sure that you have stable URLs, and you have redirects in place. There's something that people call link rot, which is when links no longer go to either where you intended, the pages have moved, or they just send you to that dreaded 404 page. Link rot is a big problem in not just the regular web, but also there's been a growing issue with it in academic papers that reference other previous studies or that link out to databases. It's at every level. It's at the most basic, just people sending links to something that they find interesting, and up to a major journal that's being published by an American university about new scientific research. It's something that everyone has to deal with. So if you use stable links, that's always best for the crawlers, and it means that the crawler can connect the multiple versions of the site back to the previous versions. Otherwise, you don't have that sense of the page changing over time if you can't connect them together. You want to consider using a Creative Commons license. A lot of the major archiving initiatives, like the Library of Congress that I mentioned, they have to get permission from individual website owners. It's something that's required of them legally. And so a website that's been published under Creative Commons licenses, it makes it easier for those institutions to archive that site. They already have permission to crawl and preserve the site from the Creative Commons license that's posted on the site. You want to use sustainable formats. This is something that we talk about a lot in digital archiving. What file formats are easier to preserve. So people will say that open source is easier to preserve than proprietary. Open source is files that have the code has been published. People understand how the files are put together. They are more available. They're more usable. They're not proprietary. They're not controlled by a single company. So you might want to use PDFs that follow these sustainability guidelines, or use images that do, so that they are easier for the crawlers to save. And I highly recommend the Sustainability of Digital Formats site that the Library of Congress publishes. They have both recommended and acceptable formats for both individual file types that you might have on the site and for website WARC files overall. They'll have a lot of criteria that you can look at to see what makes it most sustainable, makes it most easy to archive. It's also always good to embed metadata if you can, so that that data goes along with those attached files, so that it goes along with the images of PDF downloads, and there is more information that's connected automatically, and so there's less chance of it becoming divorced from that from that file. Finally, you want to use either your own initiatives, like I mentioned, downloading them yourself and saving them in a file structure, folder structure on your computer, or use archiving-friendly platform providers like Archiveit or Conifer that have been developed with the idea of the open internet, the open access, public access in mind, rather than something that you might eventually have trouble removing your content from if you are no longer subscribing. Some proprietary sites make it, commercial sites make it hard for you to do that. One way to check if your website is archive ready is to use the Archive Ready evaluation tool. It's a free tool that's been put together by a digital archivist named Vangelis Banos. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. And it is recommended by Library of Congress, by the National Archives and Records Administration, to check whether a website is ready to be archived. I ran our own site, the Conservation Center's site, against the Archive Ready site, and it said that we were prepared to archive except for a Gold Transparency Award for Nonprofit Transparency that shows up at the very bottom of the homepage to say that we've been given the highest level of nonprofit transparency from GuideStar, because that's externally hosted, and so the bot wasn't able to access that. So tools and vendors. People can archive websites in a variety of ways. You can, again, do it yourself, use these various tools such as the Save Page Now feature on the Wayback Machine website, which will let you save an individual page. You can use a free account on Conifer. You can use a paid subscription account. And I'll be talking a little bit about each of these tools and what their benefits are, what their downsides are, and it depends really on the type of collection that you need to archive, what your budget is, and how you want users to be able to access that information long term. So I promise that I don't work for Internet Archive. I don't get a kickback from them, but I'm going to keep plugging them because they do offer some of the most comprehensive, affordable, and easy to implement options for web archiving. It's a nonprofit digital library of internet sites and other cultural artifacts in digital form. It was founded in 1996. It's probably the best known web archiving initiative. The general public are probably most familiar with that. They have recently had some problems with hacks, but I still think they are the premier internet archiving initiative that exists. They offer 3 major services that can be useful to you. They have the Wayback Machine, like I said, they have Archiveit, and they have Community Webs. So if you are using the Wayback Machine, you can add individual pages by using that Save Page Now feature at the bottom. Then it will send its crawler to archive that individual page. It doesn't give you a whole lot of control. It makes it easy to archive that page, but you can't control how often it's archived, so it's harder to track those changes over time. And you can't download those files with full functionality from the Wayback Machine, so it's just going to be hosted on their site. Archive It will let you create collections. You can archive as often as you want to track those changes. You can add more robust metadata. You can add descriptions. It's used by a lot of universities, a lot of GLAM organizations. That's galleries, libraries, archives, and museums to document all kinds of different things. From there was a site that I saw that was documenting New York composers. Maybe a little specific, but they're really interested in the websites of New York-based composers. So that's what they're collecting. Archive It has subsidized subscriptions for what they call mission-aligned organizations, which would probably cover most archives and community groups. You can restrict access. So if you're trying to keep certain things private, or if you only want to provide on-site use to the public, like via your reading room, you can do that. It's a feature that Archive It allows. And then finally, the Community Webs is a free initiative that I highly recommend to any community groups that are interested in recording the digital cultural heritage of their community, because the program offers professional training, technology support, support for networking, for doing cross-institution collaboration. There's about 200 libraries, I think, that have participated in Community Webs. And I recently spoke with their program manager. She said that they are hoping to accept organizations on a rolling basis going forward, because they had been using cohorts, which meant that you had to sign up at a certain time. They are hoping to be rolling. So if you work for a public library that's interested in community collecting, a community archive, a community group, that would be a very affordable option for you that has a lot of support. If you want to try and capture your website yourself, but you don't want to just do that download and save on your laptop option that I offered before, you can use something called Archive Web. This is recommended by the Digital Preservation Coalition. It's a piece of software that lets you capture your website using a web browser extension. I think it only works with Google Chrome, but I think they plan to offer it for other browsers as well. It's a manual process. You have to, again, click on each page, load the content, play of any film, any little videos or music that might be embedded. It can be time consuming to use, but then once you have it, you can replay all of that from within the browser. And it's connected to something called replayweb.page. Again, this will all be in the resource document. That is the replay tool, because I said you have to have the capture tool and the replay tool. So for this, you've got Archive Web, and then you've got that replay tool. If you have a large website, if you're trying to collect from a number of different sites, this kind of manual archiving might be too time consuming. It's fine to do something that's hybrid, as long as you can document that, as long as it's what's most sustainable for your organization. Maybe you want to submit some pages to Wayback Machine through that Save Page Now function. Maybe you want to capture the most important pages yourself, or pages that have a lot of really dynamic, like playable options like the video or the music. There's no rules. Whatever works best for your organization, whatever is most sustainable is what you should do. So I mentioned Conifer a number of times. It's an open source tool. There's a free option that you can sign up for that lets you have 5 gigabytes of storage. It's not a lot, but you can download and then delete those and then archive more. So if you kind of have it rolling, it is an option. It has a pretty good success rate for capturing things like 3D graphics and embedded videos that some of the other web archiving services have trouble with. So it captures websites as you move around them. It, again, requires a little bit more manual labor than something like Archive It, but it does work well with those dynamic features. And it's currently operated by Rhizome, which is, again, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, a digital art museum that I highly recommend their site. It's connected to the new museum in New York City. So it's very reputable and has a lot of resources behind it. So it's likely to have a lot of longevity. So talked a lot about just sites themselves. Social media is the biggest beast. Social media archiving is very difficult right now in particular. There used to be a few more tools available to people. For instance, the Documenting the Now initiative that I mentioned that was founded to document Black Lives Matter. It had a lot of open source tools that were available for social media archiving. But in 2024, even though they started creating those tools in 2016, only 8 years later, a lot of those tools are no longer functional, and easy to use ones really haven't taken their place. Why is it so tough? Well, social media companies are deliberately blocking access. Part of that is privacy concerns, although I would say that from the standpoint of companies like Meta, they're probably more interested in the legal side of privacy than the ethical side of privacy. But another issue is their intellectual property. They might not own your content, but they own the platform, and they don't want to give community archivists access to that. They've also discovered that it is something that they can put a financial price on. Twitter, for example, has had a kind of up and down relationship with researchers. There's been times where it was easy for researchers to kind of what they call scrape or remove data separate from people's identifying information. So they could just kind of take your tweets, your hashtags. But after Elon Musk took over, they started charging for access to that. They raised the price beyond the means of a lot of organizations. I think the last time I saw a quote, it was up to $42,000 a month, which is just too much for even some of the largest cultural heritage sites. And what they're giving you access to in order to do that scraping is what they call the API. The API is, well, it's basically a piece of code that allows the network to integrate with third-party apps. So basically, it's like a communication channel, and different programs can use the API to talk to each other and to share information in real time. If you have access to that, you can create third-party apps that work with Twitter, like, say, Hootsuite, people who do a lot of social media work for organizations who are creating a lot of posts, a lot of content, will use something like that to automate the process. But also just to give people individual access to their own sites via these third-party apps. When Twitter raised its prices, even major companies like Microsoft and Sony just ended up having to remove it from their own platform because it was just prohibitively expensive. So that means that it was definitely priced outside of the reach of a lot of researchers, including, I think, the French National Archives had to end a major French Twitter archiving project early because they were no longer able to access what they needed to. But if you are just talking about your own site or your own Twitter handle, your own Instagram, your own YouTube, your own Facebook, or that of partnering organizations within your community that have agreed to participate in a community archiving project, then you can download your information. They'll have, like, the community groups that you are working with and who have agreed to participate would have to download their information and then send it to you. So it'll often come in the form of a zip file with machine readable HTML. But alternatively, you could just save individual posts through the web archiving methods that I mentioned earlier, which will let you capture comments. You can show a little bit more of that community engagement, but it can be very time intensive, and it's whether or not you have the staff ability to do that. There are more advanced tools available, some of which can pull comments automatically. or can do that data scraping I mentioned, but they require that you be more comfortable with things like Python or the command line or Linux, which personally are all, kind of scary terms that took me a while to get my head around. And they require, more technological support, and they're far more resource intensive. But there are a few options there that have very robust backup, and they have very reputable companies or libraries that support them. And then I've put together that list of resources. So again, I recommend Community Webs. I recommend the Library of Congress formats for sustainable archiving. The Digital Preservation Coalition put together an amazing toolkit for community archives and how they can do their own digital archiving and website archiving that was just released earlier this month that I highly recommend. And then if you do want to add web content to a collections catalog, there are metadata recommendations that have been put out by OCLC that you can look at to see how you should fill certain fields and follow certain standard language to properly catalog that. And again, this will all be on the resource list. All right. I know that was a little intensive. I am new to my position. I'm enjoying working with our clients and our partners a lot and talking about their digital collections and their needs for digital preservation, digitization initiatives, digital collecting. I am happy to answer emails. If anybody has a question about anything that I have said in the presentation today, or if you have any questions about digital preservation that are larger questions, or about how you can go about planning a digitization project, please email me. It's kpettengill@ccaha.org. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about any of their digital programs that they would like to be working on.
Thank you, Kaitlyn. So I think we'll give some time now for questions from the audience. I think there were a couple that came in during the presentation that I want to try to get to first.
Absolutely.
So I think one of the questions, and this seemed to come up, I think when you were, Kaitlyn, when you were talking about the data about website loss, if you want to try to go to that screen, although, yeah, I think right now it's showing your desktop.
Oh, my apologies.
Yeah, it's okay.
Can you see the webinar chat?
I can see the webinar chat. I just need to see your PowerPoint, if you could bring that back
I'm
up.
sorry. All right. What was it that you were interested in?
Yeah, so the question is, I think on some of that data that you were giving about website loss, and I think the question was, are these for kind of newly updated websites or older websites?
I have not seen statistics that broke it down within that 10 years. If that's what you mean, like the Pew study, they said 38% of web pages 10 years on, 38% of the pages they looked at were no longer functional. So that's almost 40%, 4 out of 10, 10 years on. It wasn't broken down by. No, I'm sorry. They were sites that existed in 2013 that 10 years later were no longer available. That 10% of event-related content. So if somebody put up a Facebook post saying we're hosting this event at our library, or we are going to be doing this community cleanup day, or we're going to be protesting this new law, 10% of that content with comments with the original event post had been lost after 1 year. I can look to see if I can find more stats about how it increases over time, but yeah, 10% lost within a year, and then it'll up to almost 40% lost over 10 years. And then they said that it was 25% total had been lost. But that was, again, from by the time that they were looking at that 25% figure was looking at sites that had been published all throughout that 10 years. So that, again, isn't broken down by the years individually. Does that answer that question?
I think so, yeah. And if it doesn't, please let us know in the chat, Elizabeth.
I know it's a lot of stats.
Yeah, it's fine. We had another question, and I know you mentioned that Conifer in particular is open source. Just a clarification that the other sites you mentioned are also open source and don't require paid subscriptions.
Well, they do. So there's a difference between it being open source and it requiring paid subscriptions. So open source is where they've published the information about it so that it is sustainable and usable over time when you're talking about files themselves. So for instance, like Archive It, I think is pretty transparent about things, but they do still a paid service because they are hosting your material. So it's different. You're paying for different things. In some commercial products, you are paying for both access to the product and you're paying for them to store your information for you. In projects like Conifer, you get that 5 gigabytes, which again, it doesn't cover a whole lot, but it is enough to do a little bit, and then you can have it be rolling as you delete and download. You're getting free access to Conifer, but you have to pay if you want to have more storage. There are other programs that don't do any kind of storage. Some of the ones that I mentioned that are a little bit more advanced, that have no fees attached, that you can simply download, but they're really hard to implement. You need to have more comfortability with coding. You have to maybe be comfortable using the command line, which I know a lot of people aren't comfortable with. And so, yeah, it's free. It's freely available to you. You can just download it and implement it, but they're not doing any storage and they're not doing any kind of support beyond having maybe a community discussion board where you can try and troubleshoot together.
Thank you, Kaitlyn. So I'm seeing a lot of thank yous rolling in, a lot of people who are really thanking you for such an excellent presentation, Kaitlyn.
Oh, very kind.
And some great resources. I guess if we have maybe 1 or 2 more questions, I'll give it a little bit of time, just in case anything comes up. But this was really amazing. Thank you, Kaitlyn, and really appreciate all of this information and these clear resources. So thank you for sharing.
I hope it is useful to people. And if you end up doing any kind of archiving of your own sites or community archiving, I would love to see what you put together. So if you can share a public access side, I would love to have a look.
Amazing. And just again, huge thanks, Kaitlyn. Thanks to Camilla Dawson, who's been behind the scenes with all of the tech and the setup for today's webinar. Thanks to Laura, our ASL interpreter for today. This was great. And again, thanks to the National Endowment for the Humanities, the William Penn Foundation, and the Independence Foundation, and to all of you for showing up today. So our next webinar will be Good Care for Goodreads and More, it's going to be kind of a fun partnership that we're doing with the Goodreads Sci-Fi and Fantasy Book Club. So look for that. That'll be on December 7th at noon. We hope to see you there. We'll have lots of great tips for caring for books and other collectibles. And when this program ends, a little survey will pop up after your window closes. We'd kindly ask that you fill this out and let us know how we're doing. And you can also use this as a chance to let us know other topics that you'd like to see us cover in future programs. So big thanks, everyone, and we hope you all have a lovely afternoon or whatever time it happens to be from where you're tuning in today. So thank you.